Did you know there are almost 2,000 national parks in the world? Today, we're taking you to 5 of them. 5 places chosen not just for their beauty, but for how completely different they are from one another. They remind you that the planet you live on is stranger and more generous than you ever imagined. 5 national parks, 5 corners of the world, 1 journey. Let's go and discover them. Mount Fuji is 3,776 meters tall, perfectly symmetrical in its volcanic cone, snow-capped for 8 months of the year. It is the highest mountain in Japan, the most climbed mountain in the world, and the subject of more paintings, poems, and woodblock prints than any other natural feature on Earth. None of that information comes close to preparing you for what it actually feels like to see it. There is something about the shape of Fuji. The near-perfect symmetry of the cone, the way it rises alone from the surrounding landscape without foothills or competitors, the precise relationship between its bulk and its height, that produces in almost every person who sees it for the first time a feeling that is hard to name. Not awe exactly, something quieter, recognition perhaps, as though the mountain corresponds to something already present in the mind. Some ideal of what a mountain should be that Fuji simply and completely fulfills. The Fuji-Hakone-Izu National Park protects not only the mountain itself, but the landscape that gives it context. The Fuji 5 Lakes, where the mountain's reflection doubles its height in the still water at dawn. The ancient cedar forests of the lower slopes. The Hakone region, where volcanic hot springs and mountain passes have drawn travelers for over 1,000 years. The Japanese have a saying, "A wise man climbs Fuji once, and a fool climbs it twice." The climb itself is not the point. The point is to have been in its presence, to have understood, in the way that only physical presence allows, why this mountain has occupied the Japanese imagination for 15 centuries and shows no sign of releasing it. Lençóis Maranhenses sits on the northeastern coast of Brazil, and it looks, from the air, like nothing else on the planet's surface. A vast field of pure white sand dunes, stretching for 1,500 square kilometers inland from the Atlantic coast, its surface interrupted in the rainy season by thousands of freshwater lagoons that collect in the valleys between the dunes in shades of turquoise, blue, and green so vivid that they appear artificially colored. The dunes are not, technically, a desert. The annual rainfall here is higher than in most parts of Europe, and it is precisely that rain that creates the lagoons that make the landscape so singular. The sand comes from the rivers that drain the Brazilian interior, carried to the coast, and then blown inland by the constant Atlantic winds. The name means the bedsheets of Maranhão, and seen from above, the white dunes and blue water do have a quality of something domestic and vast at once. Few tourists reach Lençóis Maranhenses. The nearest international airport is hours away, the access routes are limited, and the lagoons are only full between July and September. That difficulty of access is, of course, also the point. The places that ask something of you before they reveal themselves tend to be the ones that stay with you longest. The Dolomites are mountains that look as though they were designed rather than formed. Vertical towers and sheer walls of pale limestone rising from the green valleys of northeastern Italy in formations of such geometric precision that the first geologists who studied them in the 18th century genuinely could not agree on what they were looking at. The rock itself, Dolomite, named after the French mineralogist Déodat de Dolomieu, who first described it, gives the range its characteristic color, pale gray in flat light, deep amber at midday. The Dolomites were shaped by an ancient tropical sea that covered this part of Europe 250 million years ago. Its coral reefs compressed over geological time into the limestone that erosion has since carved into the towers and spires that define the skyline today. The Via Ferrata routes, iron rungs and cables fixed into the rock faces during the First World War, when these mountains were a battlefield, now allow climbers to access faces that would otherwise require technical expertise. The meadows of the Alpe d'Isuse, the highest alpine plateau in Europe, spread between the peaks in a landscape of wildflowers and silence that has a quality of peace, a specific, earned, high-altitude peace that the valleys below cannot replicate. The Serengeti is the oldest ecosystem on Earth that has survived into the modern age essentially unchanged. And standing in it, that age is something you feel rather than simply know. The vast open plains of northern Tanzania stretch in every direction without interruption, the grass moving in long waves under a sky so wide that the horizon curves visibly at its edges. There are no fences in the Serengeti, no roads that matter. What there is, in numbers that the mind struggles to process, is life. The Great Migration, the annual movement of over 1.5 million wildebeest, 250,000 zebra, and 500,000 gazelle across the Serengeti and into the Masai Mara of Kenya, is the largest overland animal migration our planet has ever produced. It is not an event that happens at a particular time in a particular place. It is a continuous, year-round circuit driven by rain and grass, a living river of animals that has been flowing across this landscape for longer than any human record. The river crossings of the Mara, where the herds plunge into crocodile-filled water in their thousands, driven by an instinct that overrides every individual impulse of self-preservation, are the moments that stop the breath. But the Serengeti is more than its migration. The lion prides of the Central Plains, the cheetah mothers teaching their cubs on the open grassland, the leopards draped over acacia branches in the golden afternoon light. The Serengeti is where the relationship between predator and prey plays out at a scale that reminds you what the natural world was before we began reducing it. Göreme National Park sits in the heart of Cappadocia, a region of central Turkey that the volcanic eruptions of Mount Erciyes and Mount Hasan buried under deep layers of ash and lava millions of years ago. What time and erosion have done to that ash since then is one of the strangest and most beautiful geological stories on Earth. The soft volcanic rock, called tuff, has been carved by wind and rain into a landscape of tall, tapered columns known as fairy chimneys, rising from the valley floors in their hundreds, their caps of harder rock balanced on top like the hats of giants frozen mid-stride. But Göreme is not only a geological phenomenon. For over 1,000 years, the people of Cappadocia cut their homes, their churches, their monasteries, and their entire underground cities directly into this living rock, creating one of the most complete examples of human adaptation to landscape anywhere in the ancient world. The cave churches of the Göreme Open Air Museum, their interiors painted with Byzantine frescoes that have survived intact in the dry Anatolian air for over a millennium, are among the finest examples of early Christian art in existence. At dawn, when the hot air balloons rise above the fairy chimneys in their dozens against a sky that shifts from deep blue to pale gold, Cappadocia produces one of the most photographed images in the world, and one of the few that the photograph consistently fails to capture. If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up and subscribe so you never miss the next cinematic video. Safe travels, everybody!